The Holocaust has emerged as the most prominent model of man's ability to do evil, which arguably it was. Early writings, early publications by survivors, journalists, and others went a long way into making this image of the Holocaust spread across the world. Even in the first few years after the end of World War II, in the first 5 years, some 200 memoirs were penned by survivors. The Diary of Anne Frank was first published in 1947 in Dutch, and subsequently it was translated into 65 languages, including Basque and Khmer, Nepalese, and Armenian. Even there were unauthorized versions in Chinese as early as the 1980s. The film about Anne Frank, which was released in 1959, also went a long way towards spreading a certain recognition of the Holocaust around the world. In the late 1970s, there was a television show, The Holocaust, the story of the family Weiss. This television show was viewed in many, many countries around the world, and especially in Europe and the United States, caused many people to have a wider recognition about the events of the Holocaust. Of course, films like Schindler's List, which was released in 1993, and during the course of the first year or so played in 29 countries, including the Philippines and Uruguay and Peru, also went a long way in spreading information about the Holocaust. In China itself, people talk about The Winds of War and War and Remembrance, the two books, and then the miniseries based on the books by Herman Wouk, which went a long way in bringing a certain recognition of the Holocaust to China as well. This began in the mid-1990s. A book like Night by Elie Wiesel became an Oprah Book Club bestseller in 2006, and this too spread much information about the Holocaust to many people. There are other ways that the information about the Holocaust is spread and a recognition about it is spread. Things like the International Task Force that deals with Holocaust education, Holocaust research, was established in 1998, and today 27 countries around the world are a part of that task force and try to advance Holocaust education, and many other countries are seeking to join it. And perhaps last in all of this, we need to understand that the 27th of January was adopted by the United Nations in 2005 as Holocaust Remembrance Day, marking the day of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp on 27 January 1945. So the Holocaust as an idea spread far, and it's been a long process. But I think we have to understand that as far as the Holocaust has spread around the globe, it's often spread very thinly. In a sense, the success of spreading a certain understanding of the Holocaust has also caused the problems in understanding what it really is in many places where the understanding remains quite superficial. I think it's true that for many people across the globe, their understanding of the Holocaust could be called iconic. What do I mean? Well, for many people, the victim of the Holocaust is Anne Frank. She's probably the best known victim of the Holocaust anywhere in the world because of the diary and because of the film. And what do we learn from looking at Anne Frank as a victim of the Holocaust? Well, we learn a lot of things. We learn, first of all, that Jews left Germany before the outbreak of the war, getting to places like the Netherlands, to Holland, which the Frank family did. That some of them went into hiding in 1942, in the summer of 42, and spring and summer of 42, as deportations were just beginning from Holland, and the threat for deportations was looming over Dutch Jewry as a whole. We learned that in 1944, in August, she was discovered, and so that some people who hid did so unsuccessfully. We learn about the family being sent to the Westerbork transit camp, which was the camp from which Dutch Jews were sent to the extermination camps in Europe, deeper into Europe. And we also learned that she was sent in 1944 to Bergen-Belsen after having been in Auschwitz for a short period. She died in Bergen-Belsen. She wasn't murdered there outright by gas. She wasn't shot. She died of disease because of the conditions in the camp, which were so deadly, which is also part of the Holocaust. And of course, we learn from her diary, her most famous quote, that despite everything, I believe that people are really good at heart, which shows that some people during the Holocaust, some Jews as they were undergoing the events of the Holocaust, remained as optimistic that things would be better and that human beings, at least some human beings, really were good at heart. But there's many things we don't learn about her story. We don't learn about Jews who managed to hide and were unsuccessful in other places around Europe, or how hard it was to hide. We don't learn from her story the fact that in Holland, where there's a reputation that everybody was helping Jews, the truth is that out of 140,000 Jews, 100,000 were murdered. We don't learn from her story that the Dutch bureaucrats were very involved in carrying out the Holocaust, that the secretaries generals, who were the men in charge of the government offices, gave a free hand to the Germans and collaborated with them in the murder of Dutch Jewry. We also don't learn from her story that many victims didn't die in camps, that they died in ghettos, or they were shot by the Einsatzgruppen and the people working with them across Eastern Europe from 1941 onwards. Her experience is the experience of Anna Frank, as difficult as they were, very different, say, from a young person almost of her age who was hiding in the Lodz ghetto, a young boy named David Sheryakowiak. He writes, in April 29, 1942, the following: "It's really bad at home. There's no fuel, and we are eating our May rations of potatoes in April. No one knows what will happen in May. Nothing good, that's for sure. Again, I don't have any will, or rather any strength for studying. I want to do something, but everything's exceptionally difficult for me. So I just stick to reading most of the time. Time is passing. My youth is passing. My school years, my power and enthusiasm are all passing. Only the devil knows what I will manage to save from this pogrom. I'm slowly beginning to lose my hope of coming back to life, or even of holding on to this one that I'm living now." I think that Anna Frank's diary doesn't have anything like this in it, of the kind of suffering that was going on in a place like the Lodz ghetto versus Amsterdam. One of the other icons of the Holocaust that we're all familiar with is Elie Wiesel, and in many ways he's the iconic survivor. He is a Nobel Prize winner of peace. He has written and published widely, and especially his book Night, which is an account of his experiences in the Auschwitz camp, his deportation, tell us many things about the experience of people who survived. One of the most important things his book talks about is the way he and his father helped one another and how this helped him to survive, although with the tragedy that his father died before he could be liberated. But we don't learn many things from Elie Wiesel's account. We don't learn about the many people who managed to flee eastward, especially from Poland, some 300,000 Jews who in the early stages of the war fled to the Soviet Union, deep into the Soviet Union, and their experiences. We don't learn about people who fled to the partisans and fought with them, some of them managing to survive. We don't learn about people who survived in hiding or in labor camps or in many other places. We also don't learn from his experience about the hundreds of thousands of survivors who wanted to come to the land of Israel in the wake of the war. So as much as there's an iconic representation, there's many things that are missing in his story. Another major icon, which I already mentioned early on, is Schindler. Because of Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List, and even before that the book by Thomas Keneally, many people around the world associate rescuers with Schindler. And Oskar Schindler certainly rescued people, there's no question about it. He has been recognized as a righteous among the nations here at Yad Vashem, and some 23,000 people have been recognized like Schindler. But does he represent all the rescuers? Obviously not. He's a very, very special case, a man who was a Nazi, who was a businessman, who had tremendous connections, who was able to rescue not 1 or 10 or 15 people, but many people in his factory outside of Plaszów and then later on in the Czech Republic. So this iconic rescuer is certainly not indicative of all rescuers. Now, we learn many things from him as well as the ability to rescue, the ability to manipulate the system to rescue people if you were in a certain position like he was in. But we don't learn about the many run-of-the-mill rescuers, the simple people in the villages and the towns across Europe who rescued one person or a family or 2 families and hid them on their property and went through tremendous efforts in order to keep people alive, or sometimes were unable to keep them in their homes and passed them on to other people in order to help. We certainly don't learn all of these stories. We don't learn about people who worked in the public sphere like Irena Sendler, who was a social worker in Warsaw, who was responsible for helping bring children out of the Warsaw ghetto and place them in hiding. And we don't learn about people like Vilmos Nagy Nagy, who was a Hungarian general and later defense minister, who was named a righteous among the nations because he gave orders to treat Hungarian Jewish forced laborers on the Eastern Front more equitably. All of this falls by the wayside if we only look at Schindler. And of course, it's not enough for us. Another personage that comes up in Schindler's List is the murderer, and the murderer of Amon Goeth. He's the head of the Plaszow camp, and nobody who ever saw the film could forget seeing him on the balcony and shooting Jews, just shooting them for fun. When we look at Amon Goeth, we think that the murderers, the Nazi murderers, were all savage, crazy people, because that's really how he's portrayed, and to a large extent, that's who the man was, apparently. But that's very different from another icon of murderers. That's Adolf Eichmann, who we all see as the desk murderer. Adolf Eichmann, who was in charge of deciding where the trains would go and making sure the transports went out. Of course, Adolf Eichmann himself also worked in the field in a number of places, but we don't usually think of him in that way. We think of him as the desk murderer. And how different is this kind of iconic representation from the story put forth by Christopher Browning in his book Ordinary Men about the Reserve Police Battalion 101. Here we have a group of men who were not typical murderers in the way we think of them. Many of them weren't even Nazis. Most of them were in their 30s and 40s. Most of them had never thought they would become involved in anything like murder, but when they were sent to Poland in the summer of 1942, they became involved in a murder action in a place called Józefów in Poland. And they killed 1,500 people in that action. And then subsequently, over the next months, they became involved in murder actions and gathering Jews for deportations. And all told, they had a hand in killing 38,000 Jews and deporting 45,000 others. And we know from Browning's book that when the men gave testimonies, some of them gave testimonies after the war towards a trial, that they did not talk about ideology, most of them. Most of them said they got involved in murder because they were part of the unit, peer pressure. They didn't want to look weak. Now, this doesn't mean that that's exactly what happened, but they're certainly contributing factors in why they're murderers, and that's very different from Amon Goeth standing on the balcony at Plaszow shooting Jews. So the problem of iconic representations are that they tend to be two-dimensional, and they only tell us a certain part of the story. There's something that happens because we often have this superficial understanding of the Holocaust, and that's that it's very easy for us to make equations between it and other events in history. It's very common these days to equate the crimes of the Holocaust with the crimes of the communists, for example. We have to understand there's certain similarities here, but there's great differences, especially in terms of ideology, in terms of the whys and what's going on here. In many places, the Holocaust is made equivalent with abortion. Abortion certainly is a very important topic that we need to understand and to talk about, but equating it with the Holocaust and calling it a Holocaust neither serves our understanding of the problems of abortion, nor does it serve our understanding of the Holocaust, since they're coming on such tremendously different backgrounds. And a host of other events can be included in this, including what happens in Israel between Palestinians and the Israelis, and how that's often cast in the light of the Holocaust when the Holocaust has nothing to do with it, and once again, doesn't help us understand either the Holocaust or the event that we're talking about. So this two-dimensional view that we have from the icons often leads to distortions and trivializations and banalization of the Holocaust. If everything's the Holocaust, then nothing's the Holocaust. Still, the icons are important. They're important because they spread a certain understanding and because they bring a certain consciousness about the events of the Holocaust. If we could have a hope for what they really should do, they should be a trigger. They should be a trigger to cause people to want to know more. So they'll delve more deeply into the subject and try to learn more about the history of the Holocaust. Somebody should begin their understanding of the Holocaust by reading something like the Diary of Anne Frank, but they shouldn't stop there.